All right, Bert, how are we looking?
Looks like we have quorum, so we should be good to go.
All right, okay. All right, just give me a second here. I will start my video and get that set up, and then we'll get some introductions going. Okay. All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mel Pins, Chairman of the City of Des Moines Zoning Board of Adjustment. I want to welcome everybody to our monthly meeting of this hearing. This board has the power under Iowa law and the zoning ordinance of the City of Des Moines to hear and make decisions on requests for variances and exceptions from the regulations in the zoning ordinance, to review conditional use permit requests, and to review appeals from any decision of the city staff and the administration of the zoning ordinance. And I'm just taking a few minutes here to visit with you by camera. What I'll be doing is turning off the camera so we can save bandwidth. And then staff will show all of our process on the screen for documents, maps, etc. But to give everybody a welcome here, as well as to explain our procedures for today, I'll be visiting with you here with camera and microphone for just a few minutes. So back to that. The members of this board are citizens of the City of Des Moines, and they have been appointed to this board by the City Council. The board members are volunteers and receive no compensation for their public service. I'll go ahead and introduce our board members. I believe we have 6 of 7 board members present here. We will have, I think, a 7th member joining us later this afternoon. Subject to where we're at in the agenda, we should at least always have 6 members today. Those board members present are Nathan Blake, Cindy Smith, Marlis Jones, Lynn Carlson, Dave Gare, and again, myself, Mel Pins. I'm also going to reference our city staff and introduce those that may be assisting with us today. First of all is our legal counsel to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. That's Judy Parks Cruz. City staff that will be presenting and providing information during the hearing or support includes Bert Drost, City Planner, Eric Lundy, City Planner, Jason Van Essen, City Planner, and Catherine Drehas, City Planner. The city's zoning enforcement officer is Sue Ann Donovan. Michael Ludwig is the city planning administrator, and Tyler Hall is our meeting moderator. I'm going to go over our meeting procedure here for your information, but on each and every agenda item, we will help everyone through the process. So if this is your first time in front of us, don't be afraid of being left out or being nervous about our procedure. We'll have plenty of reminders and requests for your involvement as the hearing progresses. First and foremost, the Board of Adjustment is a quasi-legal board. This hearing will be conducted with the procedures and formats as authorized by Iowa law and the city's ordinances. While the meeting is open to the public, the meeting is being recorded by both audio and video for a legal record of these proceedings. The board members have each received a copy of the agenda and a staff recommendation. The board is required to base its decision on each item upon the criteria established by law for the type of relief sought by the applicant. The law applicable to each case has been identified in the written staff report. If the facts, as determined by this board, demonstrates that the criteria established by law for granting the relief has been satisfied, then the board must grant the relief. Otherwise, the board must deny the requested relief. Each item will be announced in the order that it appears on the agenda. Items listed on the consent portion of the agenda are not planned to be individually discussed, and they will be considered for approval in accordance with the recommendations in the staff report, unless the appellant does not agree to the conditions recommended by staff, or if there's an individual in the audience at the hearing or a board member that requests that the item be removed from the consent agenda so that a full discussion on the matter can occur. After an item is announced, staff will give a brief overview of the appeal and present any written comments received prior to the hearing. Then the applicant or their representative will be allowed up to 10 minutes each to present their appeal. After the applicant presents their appeal, we will move to the public comment portion of the hearing for that item. Anyone wanting to speak in support of, in opposition to, or in neutrality to an appeal will be allowed up to 5 minutes each to present their comments. And we will make sure that we let everybody know if we're asking for comments in support, opposition, or neutrality. For any speaker, this will be their one and only opportunity to address the board on that specific item. So if you wish to speak on the item at hand at the appropriate time when the chair calls for public comments, please click the raise hand icon in the participants panel if you're participating through your computer by Zoom, or if you're participating by phone, press *9, and then the meeting moderator will know to call on you. When it is your turn, the meeting moderator will unmute your microphone and acknowledge you to proceed with your comments. If you are proceeding over the phone, you must then press *6 to unmute your phone. And again, we will help you through that process. If you have any documents that you plan to use in your presentation, if you have not already provided those to city staff prior to the hearing, you will need to email those to the city at the email address of planning@dmgov.org. That's planning, PLANNING, at dmgov.org. Once all concerned citizens have spoken, the board will then ask any additional questions of city staff. And lastly, the applicant will be given 3 more minutes for rebuttal or closing comments if there's been any opposition to the appeal by the city or any others. All speakers are required to begin their presentation by giving both their name and address of business or residence in the event that you may need to be contacted for legal notices related to the outcome of this appeal. All speakers are requested to remain courteous and to focus their comments only upon those facts that demonstrate whether or not the criteria established by law has been satisfied. Speakers are also asked to ensure that they are respectful of time considerations. If necessary, the board chair will limit further comments by a speaker if they exceed their time limitation. After all testimony has been provided on an item, the board will then close any further public comment on that item, and the board will immediately deliberate the request, and we will make a decision on that appeal here today. Please note that it takes at least 4 affirmative votes for any zoning appeal to gain approval. If your appeal is approved today, we ask that you wait until at least 1 week from today's hearing to contact the city's Permit and Development Center if you would need to obtain any necessary building or sign permits that are related to your appeal. This will allow the decision of this board to be documented in the form of a decision and order, which will be provided to both you and city staff. Any appeal that is approved today by this board must be implemented, constructed, or otherwise utilized within 2 years of the date of this decision by the board, or such approval shall expire. The decisions of this board can only be appealed to the Iowa District Court. So if you believe you've been harmed by an error made by this board, your only remedy is to seek relief through the court within 30 days of the filing of the board's decision and order. If you believe the zoning regulations applied by this board are wrong, you may petition the city council to change those regulations for future considerations. All material written or otherwise used today as part of any presentation is a part of the permanent record. So you may contact city staff after the hearing if you need a copy of any items used today in the hearing. Also, we ask that you keep your microphone on mute other than when addressing the board to limit distractions during the hearing while it is in progress. We also ask that you refrain from using any chat or question and answer function as part of the Zoom meeting, as that conferencing function will not be monitored for response, and use of that function could actually be construed as what's called an ex parte communication outside of the hearing process. So that's the formal part of my introduction here. So what I'm going to do here is turn off my video screen and turn this back over to Bert Drost to review any changes in the agenda, and then we'll begin with our consent agenda items.
Sure. Mr. Chair, members of the board, Bert Drost with the City of Des Moines. Item number 1, I believe will be able to stay on the consent agenda. We received no opposition to that item. And that's the type 2 zoning exception for the Porter Hardware business at 4207 Hubble Avenue. However, item number 2, which is a conditional use for the property at 2590 Hubble Avenue, we have received a letter or letter in opposition from the Accent Neighborhood Association. So staff is going to have that one removed from the consent portion of the agenda for a full discussion item. Otherwise, no other changes to today's agenda. Items 3 and 4 will remain as discussion items.
Okay, so basically, without discussion, the board has been requested to look at, staff recommendation is to look at approving the Porter Hardware Type 2 zoning exception at 4207 Hubble Avenue. Is there anybody present here in the Zoom meeting or by telephone that would be opposed to the board granting approval on item number 1 here for Porter Hardware? If there's anybody participating by Zoom that would be in opposition to us granting approval of this item, please hit the raise hand function. Or if you're participating by phone, hit *9 if you'd be in opposition to us approving item 1, and then we can recognize you briefly. So is there anybody in opposition to that? Raise hand in Zoom or *9 by phone. All right, Bert, Tyler, anybody else? Do we see anybody in opposition there?
I am not seeing you.
Okay. All right. So board members, as we have nobody in opposition from the audience, unless members of the board have any questions or would be in opposition to granting approval on item 1, would there be a motion and a second to grant approval for that item?
This is Marlis. I will so move to approve that.
And do we have a second?
I'll second. This is Cindy.
Okay. All right. So we got a motion by Marlis and a second by Cindy Smith to approve the type 2 zoning exception at 4207 Hubble. All those in favor will take roll call. Say aye. Opposed would be nay.
Nathan Blake.
Aye.
Lynn Carlson.
Aye.
Dave Gare.
Aye.
Marlis Jones.
Aye.
Cindy Smith.
Aye.
And Mel Pins.
Aye.
That motion carries 7-0.
Okay, so this will move us to our regular portion of the hearing.
Excuse me, that's 6-0.
Oh, yes. All right, and that will move us to our regular portion of the hearing as we will hear item 2. So staff will first give a brief introduction to the appeal request, and then we will have the appellant be able to present for up to 10 minutes. So we'll kick it over to staff to start us off on item 2.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Catherine Dreyhaus, planner for the City of Des Moines. This item is located at 2590 Hubble Avenue. This is the former Gordman's building, and the appellant is looking to convert the existing building into a self-service storage use. As mentioned, it's located on Hubble Avenue across from the East Side Library. I'll make special note of a rear entrance to the property from East 25th Street. Here are a few site photos to give you a little bit of context on the site. This is looking from inside the property out to Hubble Avenue from the far northeast corner of the parking lot, front of the building. This is the kind of northern side of the building, coming from the western entrance from East 25th Street. And then just a little bit from that particular entrance as well. The applicant provided us with a site sketch and some information so that we can see what they intend to do. And then I will zoom in just a little bit on this rendering so you can see some of their intent for the front facade. I will note that as this is a conditional use request, they did not need to provide us with full site plan at this time. Anything that moves forward will require a site plan to be reviewed. Let's see. So we are recommending approval of the request for this conditional use. A few of our conditions are that there shall be no outside storage of materials. Any occupation of the building for self-service storage, you shall comply with the requirements of Chapter 135 and a site plan. And then any modification needs to comply as well with the building and fire codes. The applicant was also required to do neighborhood communication, and they provided us with the packet of information they sent out as part of that.
Mhm.
And you'll see that they included some of the same drawings that we received. They did respond to us this morning that they had some technical difficulties, so they just found some of their messages from people due to their neighborhood notification process. We do have a card from Mr. Kenny, and that is reflected on the consent map, so you'll see it in a little bit, but here are his comments. I can zoom in if needed further. And then they had, looks like Mr. DeWild also responded to the neighborhood notification. We did not receive a card from him as of yet, if he did send one in. And then looks like the representative of the appellant also received communication from the appellant themselves. Our consent map, oops, excuse me, here shows, let's see, the number of communication we received back from comment cards. Mr. Kinney, as I mentioned, had also reached out directly to the appellant, and then here's his card as represented on the notification, or excuse me, the consent map. And then I can zoom in on the cards. Generally, they were in support or neither for nor against. The second card is from the Fairmount Park Neighborhood Association. So I'll just point that out, since we have two neighborhood associations that were notified through this process. And the other one, as we mentioned previously, has responded in opposition. And I can come back through these cards if I'm moving too quickly through them. And then Mr. Kenny's card, as mentioned. We can go back to his comments that he provided to the representative of the appellant if anyone is interested. And then here is the letter from the Accent neighborhood with their concerns. Let's see, I believe the main part is that they did not feel a self-storage facility was the appropriate use of the property, given that there are already 3 significantly sized storage unit facilities within 1 mile of this location. So we can come back to this again if I've moved too quickly. That wraps up my presentation at this time. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board has for me.
Can you please go back to the accent letter?
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks.
Okay.
I guess a question, this is Cindy Smith. The question I have is, why are they asking for a conditional use permit? Do they only want to use this storage unit short term?
Sorry, I didn't really explain the need for that. So this is should be a change in use, since previously it was a retail use, and then self-service storage is a different type of use. And it needs the conditional use approval when it is in the MX3 mixed use district.
So Catherine, to expand on that, the MX3 district may allow for self-storage use within that zoning district. However, that use needs to just have a review by the board as a conditional use so that we can, in essence, make sure it fits in best as possible. And again, if I'm overreaching here, it'd be very similar. A tavern may be allowed in certain zoning districts, but still requires a conditional use so we can ensure that it's fitting in as best as possible. Would that be a good way to summarize that?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Sure. And conditional use permits aren't related to short term. Those would be temporary permits. So a conditional use permit, again, the use may be allowed in the district, but the use also requires review by the board before allowing the use. So related to that, a question that I would have, Catherine, as this would be required to go through site plan review, generally speaking, that would mean any pole signage related to the use would have to come down and be monument sign at a maximum or just on the building, probably some additional landscaping or green space requirements. And I would assume dumpsters would have to be screened. Are those general summaries correct?
I believe you've hit on everything. I'm a little unsure about the timeline on the pole sign, so I might defer to Bert to provide
Mr.
clarification.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Yes, the site plan itself would be the triggering event to have to convert the pole sign to a freestanding sign.
Right. Yeah.
And
I don't. Mhm.
the site plan would also require some of the excess paving to be removed, but this board, if it so chooses, could add a condition that says any excess paving not required for off-street parking must be removed.
Mm-hmm.
If you're familiar with the former Kmart site across the street to the east, which I believe Accent referenced in their letter, they did remove a significant amount of pavement at the north site. So the board could consider a condition along those lines.
Does your staff recommendation have that in there or just the minimum site plan requirements?
Just had the minimum site plan requirements.
Okay. All
And this is
right.
Marlis. I'm kind of confused about that. So the minimum site requirement, so that doesn't push them to remove concrete?
It would make them have to remove enough concrete to meet our landscaping standards. But
Right.
I was just, as I was reading Accent's letter right now, it occurred to me that we could add a condition that would just give it more teeth, that any excess paving would have to be removed.
Excess paving with an E, correct?
Yeah, excess, yes.
Yes. I guess we need to hear more about what the appellant's proposing to do here. I don't know what excess paving might be. Reasonable paving for parking and ingress and egress would certainly need to be allowed. But perhaps we can come back to that after we see what the proposal is.
Sounds fair.
All right, Catherine, anything else you want to present or are you good?
I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, board members, do we have any other questions for city staff for the moment? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and turn this over to the applicant or their representative. You've got up to 10 minutes to present the reasoning for your request for this conditional use permit. And we need you to start by giving your name and address for the record. And if you need to hit raise hand in Zoom, staff probably knows who you are, but.
There we go.
All right, do we have that person recognized?
Yeah, Bob Gibson should be able to speak now.
All right.
This is Bob Gibson with Civil Design Advantage, and we're at 3405 Southeast Crossroads Drive in Grimes, and we're the engineering firm serving as a consultant to the buyer that's going to convert this. I can't see all who's on here, but I don't know if the architect is or a representative of Southwestern Properties. I believe David Rogel is on, who's a representative of the current owner. But as far as the removal of pavement, there's certainly going to be some of that, and I guess I would defer to the potential buyer and developer of this as to how much. That's not been specified. There's definitely less parking required for this use than was for a retail store, so it's not necessary. And some of that parking area is in the floodplain too, so there's potential for removing it and for increasing the landscape area, as was mentioned earlier, to meet standards. But that's something that can be worked out during the actual site plan process, which we have only just begun. It's kind of
right. Okay. All right. So Bob, I see existing conditions that staff has up on the screen. I realize you may not have a site plan done, but is there, besides the elevation drawing of the facade, do you have a conceptual drawing of what your layout would look like?
Yeah, that's the next drawing in the queue there.
Okay, staff, can we have you go down to that? That may help Bob explain a little what they're trying to do here.
Yeah, that basically it's the same thing. It's just showing, some of the truck access and stuff. What you see there, though, you can see where that flood line is. How much of that is in the floodplain of that little drainage area? It's that dark line that crosses, and it's labeled in the parking lot. So this concept was just an early concept, and it doesn't show any removal of pavement at this point. But obviously, we're going to continue the connection out to East 25th Street from Hubble. So there will be some continuous pavement there from Hubble all the way out to 25th, and to allow access around the rear of the building as well. As to how much pavement would be cut out to facilitate that, to make sure that still flows well and allows enough parking, that's just not determined yet.
Yeah. Bob, in regard to your access to East 25th Street, I don't know if this has been a concern or not, but I could see the opportunity for more cut-through traffic into a residential neighborhood of people trying to pass through your site, or people up to no good, they can get in behind the building. Is that East 25th access, is that required for some fire or emergency requirements, or is that just something that was there previous and you're going to keep?
Well, it's something that was there previous. I don't know if it's required. It may be for use of the easement, and I spoke this morning with Louis DeWild, who owns the adjacent strip mall there, and there is an easement along the back of the old Gordman's building there that allows access to the back of that strip mall, and I'm not sure if that involves access from East 25th, but whether it does or not, that access has been there for who knows how long. And I was there when the Gordman's was active, and a storage unit is certainly going to be generating far less user traffic. Cut across traffic isn't going to be significantly changed if it's occurring much at all now. Now it's so.
Yep. Okay. I've got you there. If staff could go back to slide number 9, the existing. In a strange way, I can't tell what I'm looking at here, but it almost looks like on the site, on that east portion of the site, that there's actually some areas where there isn't pavement, or is that just broken up old pavement? Just where it says east of the word site, it's right in the middle.
I think it's broken up old pavement. Okay. I'm looking at it on Google Earth right now.
Yeah. With that shadow effect, I can't tell. It almost looks like the pavement was gone, but yeah. So that's just old pavement, but in essence, your intention would be to retain that, correct?
To repave it?
Well, first to retain it. I don't know if you're going to repave it or not, but it looks pretty bad shape then.
Yeah, I really can't speak to that. If somebody
Okay.
from Southwestern Properties is on, they can address that. I mean,
Okay.
if it's in bad shape, it might as well come out, I
Right.
would think.
Right.
So,
All right.
and
So
not be
Bob,
replaced.
what role do you have in the project since you're the primary presenter for this case?
I'm the one preparing the site plan
Okay. All right.
for Southwestern, so I'm their representative.
Okay.
I'm preparing the site plan, but I can't make commitments
No.
regarding to exactly what they're going to do. That's got to come from them.
Okay.
Mr.
All right.
Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
this is Catherine. We do also have Jackson Gibbons and then a David Rogel, who are both on the call and have been given permission to speak when you are ready to acknowledge them.
Okay, well, since the applicant has 10 minutes to present their appeal, we're going to have to start dividing this out then. Has staff been tracking time on the presentation?
Let me check for you.
Okay, because what I'll have to do then is give Bob and David each 5 minutes each, and we would assume they are speaking in support of their own project. It's important for us. The applicant has 10 minutes to present their case.
We were about halfway there.
Okay.
Yeah, about 5 minutes in there.
All right, so if Bob's done with presenting on his part of it, then we can certainly turn it over to the next speaker and give them another 5 minutes then. Let's go ahead and do that. Bob, are you okay with that?
Yep, I'm fine.
All right, so would we be recognizing Jackson then?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
All right, Jackson, you can go ahead. Again, we need your name, address, and you've got up to, well, we'll give you the remaining 5 minutes as the appellant.
Perfect. Thank you. This is Jackson Gibbons with Southwestern Property Corp. We're located at 7979 East Tufts Avenue, Suite 1125 in Denver, Colorado. I appreciate the time and allowing us to speak to the board. I appreciate Bob giving the introduction here. In terms of landscaping, which kind of seems to be the concern, we have taken a close look at what U-Haul has done across the street. And as Bob alluded to, we are open to increasing the landscaping on this site. We know it's going to be required in the site plan. There is some of that looks like older pavement, which looks to be a good area to add some of that landscaping. Of course, we would want to be courteous to our neighbors, especially the strip mall adjacent to us, and ensuring that they continue to have access. But we are absolutely open to adding landscaping to this project. We think adding this self-storage use will definitely liven up this building, help with some of our neighbors' concerns with some vandalism and some people loitering. So we absolutely believe we can help solve some of those concerns with this use. And I just want to keep it short for you guys. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer any specific questions.
All right, then. Do we have any questions for Mr. Gibbons?
This is Marlis. I have one. So I know we don't have the official site plan, but I assume if it's going to resemble U-Haul, then there will also be on the side of the road landscaping. But then you're also thinking that where that concrete has been broken up for about the last 15 years, you would also do landscaping there?
Yes, that is correct. As Bob alluded, we don't have a specific site plan quite yet that we would be submitting. So as to the complete extent of the area, I don't have an exact answer for you, but yes, we would look to put landscaping in that area, kind of along that drainage kind of creek bed area. And we, do have fairly limited frontage on Hubble, but we do plan to do some improvements along there, including a sidewalk. some landscaping, and of course, working with that sign.
Okay. All right, thank you. That area hasn't used probably 3/4 of that parking for 25 years when it was Gordman.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Jackson, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I
Or
think
any other-
that's it.
Okay. All right, board members, any other questions for Jackson? Okay, all right. If none, tell you what we'll go ahead and do here, I think, for just ease of the hearing and the number of folks that I think are present on the applicant's behalf, we're going to go ahead and switch this to speakers in support of the request. So to manage time considerations, if there's anybody else with the corporation or the applicant, we'll give them up to 5 minutes. They can present their support of their request. And then certainly if there are any others present. So, so who would like to speak in support of the request? Was Brandon part of that?
Not that I'm aware. We did
No.
have
Okay.
David Rogel.
David, okay, yeah. Yes, I'm sorry, yeah, David. So we can go ahead and recognize David. David, would you like to address the board? You can have up to 5 minutes.
This is David Rogel, 560 Sylvan Avenue. Just want to make sure you can hear me okay?
Yes, sir, just fine.
Terrific. Good afternoon. Really, I have virtually nothing to add. I'm fully in support of the presentation handled by Bob and Jackson. I'd be happy to answer any questions that are more properly directed to the owner. But frankly, I have very little to add to what has already been said.
Okay, all right. All right, well, thank you very much. They say brevity is the art of wit, if I've got that right. So sometimes that's okay. All right, well, thank you, sir. Do we have anybody else as a participant attendee that wishes to speak in support of the request? If so, hit the raise hand icon in Zoom to be recognized, or *9 on your telephone.
This is Catherine. I'm not seeing anyone as of yet.
Okay, all right, so going once, going twice on that. All right, then we'll shift gears a little bit. Is there anybody participating in the hearing that wishes to speak in opposition to the applicant's request for this conditional use permit? Same sign, hit the raise hand icon in Zoom or *9 on your phone, and then we'll recognize folks in order of request here. Anybody to speak in opposition?
This is Catherine. I'm not seeing any hands once again.
All right. And whether you're in support or maybe not in opposition, but you just like to provide some relevant comments, that would be anybody that wishes to speak in neutrality. Same sign, raise hand in Zoom, or *9 on your phone to be recognized. All right, seeing none. Sue Ann, do we have any comments from the zoning enforcement officer?
Chair, members of the board, I have no comment.
All right, board members, do we have any questions for city staff?
This is Marlis. I have another one. Could you possibly show me again where the flood zone is on this property?
Marlis, this is Catherine. I've gone back to the map that we pull up just for the general use and for notifications. And it's going to be a little hard for me to outline the whole area, but it's kind of this area up to Hubble and then back here through the property. And then it narrows down along the creek here. And then it's kind of this section back here. So everything above this blue line and then up to the blue line that's covered up by the
Okay,
the plan line there.
Yeah.
So
okay.
So-
So then is that the assumption that the concrete has to be removed from that area?
I'm going to defer that to Bert.
Right now, without a condition prohibiting it, staff can make that request at the site plan phase. But if the board was inclined, you could put a condition on it that, again, that would give it more teeth
Mhm.
for when it comes time to do the site plan.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Thank you.
So Bert, while you're quote at the microphone, a related question to this, parking in a floodplain area, if it's pre-existing, can be allowed, but is the concern of any structures in the floodplain? We probably wouldn't be able to approve a new conditional use permit for a building that would be in the floodplain, could
Yeah.
we?
That is correct. And actually in the new zoning ordinance, or the zoning ordinance that we have now, the self-service storage is only allowed in the MX3 district if it's within an existing structure. So they wouldn't actually be able to build new structures in the parking lot anyway.
Yep. I've got you. Okay, yeah, but Marla's had a good question there. So basically that floodplain boundary is that kind of strange shaped line on the north and east side of the building, correct?
Right. And as far as off-street parking requirements go, they're required to provide 1 parking space per 10 storage units. So I'm not exactly sure how many storage units they're proposing in this building, but
Yeah.
the site plan, they would have to provide 1 off-street parking space per 10.
Okay, all right. Excellent. Okay, so we had questions for staff there, and Marla's had a good one. Any other questions for staff from the board? Okay, all right, seeing none. Applicant, while we didn't have anybody speaking in opposition, just as a courtesy, is there anything you'd like to add for final closing comments? You could have up to 3 minutes. And whoever would want to take a shot at it.
It looks like
Bob.
Mr. Gibson would like to speak.
Okay, go
Yeah,
ahead. Bob.
I would just like to address the removal of the pavement. If you're considering putting conditions on that everything within the floodplain has to be removed, that may be difficult because we want to maintain that access from East 25th to the front of the building as well. And there's no way to do that, you know, if you say we have to remove all the pavement, because basically all of that access out to East 25th is technically within that floodplain. So, I guess I would caution against making a blanket recommendation on that, but just say it's something that's to be addressed and worked out with staff and engineering as we go through the site plan process.
Yep. Bob, I think that's a good comment. And when we get to our board discussion, that will just be between board members. And I don't know what the interest may or may not be in that. At a minimum, you've got to meet site plan requirements. So there more than likely would have to be some paving removal, more than likely at the front edge or maybe some side or rear yard, just to meet the minimum requirements.
Yeah, for landscape, yeah.
Right. But in our discussion, if the board members did have a discussion, we generally don't like to be landscape architects or get super detailed on how we want things drawn out. But what if we said something to the effect of, we'd like to see, besides meeting minimum site plan requirements, an additional removal of no more than 10% of existing paving. If we had a blanket statement like that, do you think that that would put you in too much of a bind to allow access, ingress, egress, and parking?
That probably would not. I would like to hear Jackson respond to that, though.
And I would allow that, Jackson.
Sure, Jackson Gibbons here. We would be open to something like that. We're determining our unit mix, and we have about 650 units. So just being able to meet parking requirements and access requirements, and also as I mentioned, take into account our neighbors to the south, making sure they have adequate access as well for their property.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. So what we'll do at this time is we will go to board deliberation. So the board members will close the public hearing here, and we will discuss this amongst ourselves and decide where we want to head. Board members, any initial thoughts, observations, or proposals?
Hey, this is Marlis. I'll start. I don't know how many of the other board members are familiar with this property, but clearly the parking is just over the top ridiculous. I don't know what words to use, but I would like to suggest that they remove all the concrete in the floodplain except for the concrete that allows them access from East 25th.
And Marlis, the only problem we might have with that, you can see with the floodplain line, it comes up to within, I don't know what I would say that is, less than 100 feet from the building on the east side and maybe 75 feet from the north side. So if they had to remove all of that and just leave what would allow access, we probably wouldn't have any room to park. And again, I want to be careful to not try to sit here and be site designers, but if our goal would be to within reason reduce some of that paving area, we could probably say, look, you've got to meet the minimum setbacks for site plan, and maybe we'd like some additional removed, a certain percentage of what remains.
Well, and of course, with
what you're after?
Yes, and within that, of course, did he say there are going to be 1,650 units? Is that what he said?
650. So they probably need at least 65 parking spaces.
Okay. So of course we could include that to be, of course, you get all the parking spaces you are supposed to get. Whatever words would need to be needed.
Right.
Chair, this is Jason Van Assen with Plan Staff. Do you mind if I chime in? I've got something that might help the board.
Yeah, that's fine if it's helping us with the line of thought we're on.
Yeah, from working on the project across the street that came through under the old code, I do know when that went to the Planning and Zoning Commission, that we had a very similar discussion, and the language they chose to make as a condition was that all pavement, all unnecessary pavement be removed to the satisfaction of the planning administrator. And what that did is that allowed us as staff to meet with them down the road and really have that more detailed look at where do they really need the pavement for maneuvering. And we were very successful in getting a substantial amount of pavement removed. So I think a condition with that type of language that gives us the leverage to do that, and it's a little bit open-ended, would be beneficial here.
Okay, well, define unnecessary. Is that any pavement over and above that what's needed for the 650 units?
It would be basically anything they could demonstrate they needed for maneuvering and for parking to meet our requirements. Yep. So the other thing to keep in mind too is that our site plan requirements are going to require about 20% open space. So it's not, they already have to remove a fair amount to comply with that. I think it's fair to, if they don't need for instance, if they don't need that whole row of parking along that north edge there in the drawing, we're not going to support them keeping that there. So those are the kinds of things we look for staff.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jason, I think that's a very good point to make. And again, it kind of comes back where the board's intentions are good, but it can be difficult for us to try to determine what is reasonable or what is necessary for ingress, egress, and maneuvering. As volunteer citizens on this board, that's probably not our bailiwick. So we'll have a further discussion here to see if we may or may not want to include that language, to know that regardless of setbacks, they've got to have a 20% open space anyway. That's going to result in some significant reduction on what's paved. Other thoughts from the members of the board?
Hey,
We
Mel.
got 6 of you here. Yeah, Dave, go ahead.
I thought Jason's comment was spot on. I think one of the other things I want to be sensitive to is I think staff understands what is going to be necessary from a landscaping standpoint and to maintain the functionality of the maneuverability of this lot. The other thing I want to be sensitive to is these guys want to do something to this building. Let's not drive costs out of out of their budget just to remove pavement. I mean, I've got the utmost confidence in staff, and we're actually giving them a gray colored crayon in this instance, which we never do because they're all black and white, to go through this and determine what's necessary. It was successful across the street, so I'm in full support of that.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically, Dave, what you're saying is with requirements already for reducing pavement to maintain front, side, and rear yard setbacks, including having 20% open space, further restrictions or reduction on paving probably aren't warranted.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, we could look at some motions one way or the other. Again, staff is recommending approval subject to a number of conditions, including site plan requirements.
Hey, Mel, I'll make a motion.
Sure.
For staff,
go ahead, Dave.
For staff, and then what I'd like to do is add and I'm open to anyone else who wants to add another condition, but to the effect of that they will work with staff to identify all unnecessary pavement that should be removed, or words to that effect.
Yeah, so you'd like to adopt the language that was used at the former Kmart that became a U-Haul.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think staff has 3 points here that I'm fine with. I don't think we need to overthink this thing. We're not land architects. So
then you'd want to be adding an item number 4, which would be language that then requires removal of unnecessary pavement to the satisfaction of the planning administrator.
Correct.
Judy, from your perspective as our legal counsel, do you think that that's clear enough as a motion with a condition there from Dave's perspective?
Yes, Judy Parks, Cruz, legal counsel. Thanks, Mel, for asking. I wrote that down verbatim, and then the additional clarification of maneuvering, parking. And so I think that will be clear enough to staff.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, well, I think this has been very important to discuss. From my perspective here, you know, I used to go in this store in the early 70s and enjoyed it very much as a kid. But unfortunately, the retail environment is changing, and big box stores, large square footage for retail, I don't know that I'd want to be an owner investor in that. So in looking at transitional uses, while yes, we have one across the street, our zoning ordinance doesn't necessarily look at density. It looks at the quality of the use within the requirements. It's one of the reasons this has a conditional use permit. So I think we're trying to get the best fit out of this and allow an owner and a buyer developer to get some use back in this property. So I'm going to second Dave's motion to grant approval subject to those 4 conditions. So we got a motion and a second, and we'll go ahead and take a roll call. All those that would want to approve this subject to the conditions will say aye. Those opposed, nay.
Cindy Smith,
Aye.
Marlis Jones,
Nay.
Dave Gare,
Aye.
Lynn Carlson,
Aye.
Nathan Blake,
Aye.
and Mel Pins.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-1.
Okay, all right. So as I mentioned in our preamble, our decision and order will be issued next week, and you'll get a copy of that as the applicant. And then you can sit down and work on your site plan and work with the planning administrator and his staff on integrating this. So I thank everybody for your time and your interest here today in that item. Okay, that'll move us to item 3, also a conditional use approval. This would be for a location at 111 63rd Street And we'll have staff kick us off with this one with a summary of the request for the conditional use.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Bert Drost, planning staff for the city of Des Moines. Item number 3 is a request for a conditional use that would allow conversion of the existing building at 111 63rd Street to a liquor store. The subject property is located on the east side of 63rd Street. It backs up to Walnut Creek. It's located immediately to the south of a Dollar General retail store. The property is zoned MX3 district. Here are a few photos of the existing site. You can see it's currently used for a nail salon. And here's another aerial that the applicant provided. And then the floor plan that shows how the business would be arranged. Here is the consent map. We did get 2 cards in opposition and then 2 in support. One of those in support is from the Westwood Neighborhood Association. So I'll leave these up here. The first one is actually from the applicant. Zoom in on that. And here's the other one in opposition. And here is the card from the Westwood Neighborhood Association. Staff looked at this and reviewed it against the criteria that the board is obligated to base its decision on. The site meets the separation distance requirements. There aren't any churches, parks, schools, or daycares within 500 feet of the site, and there aren't any other establishments selling alcoholic liquor within a quarter mile of the site. So they do meet the conditions or the criteria necessary for granting the conditional use approval. So we have recommended approval subject to 10 conditions. And I won't read through all of them, but they're the standard conditions you're used to seeing, such as number 1, the liquor store shall be limited to the existing 2,392 square foot building. 2, they need to operate in accordance with the necessary liquor license issued through the city clerk's office, and so on. Were there any questions for me?
Questions for Bert from the board? Bert, just a brief one as far as the sale of alcohol of any type. I know it's probably outside of the minimum distance, but I believe we do have a Quick Trip in the city of Des Moines south of there that sells alcohol, correct?
I'm not sure offhand. I can look real quickly.
Which is fine, and just more conversational than anything. There's also a location, I think it's what I call a former Coastal Mart. It's on the west side of the street, so that'd be West Des Moines. I guess my question or concern is there was somebody that said that this would, as a negative, would bring people into the neighborhood to buy alcohol. But I think on 63rd Street, there's a number of other locations that already do sell some. So I don't know how this would be any different.
Right.
And does your radius take into account zoning uses that are not within our own city limits?
No, it does not.
No. All right. So 63rd is the dividing line.
Yeah.
So there could be stuff straight across the street, but that's not relevant for our
right.
review.
I did pull up our map, and Quick Trip does sell liquor, but they are almost a half a mile away. So it meets a quarter mile separation.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions for Bert from this board? Okay. All right. Then what we'll do, we'll go ahead and turn this over to the applicant. Applicant or their representative, you've got up to 10 minutes to present your reasoning for why you'd like us to grant your conditional use permit here.
Right.
And we'll just need you to start off with your name and address.
And Lloyd Ogle should be able to speak.
Yeah, this is Lloyd Ogle, attorney for Shukinder Singh. He goes by the name of Sonny. He's here with me. So just first of all, on context, right now there's a purchase agreement that's in effect for the purchase of this property. It is conditional on getting this conditional use permit, and we don't have architectural designs to show you what the storefront will look like. It's going to be branded as, it's going to kind of look and feel like a convenience store, but it will, be a liquor store with full selection of liquor. The site, we don't anticipate, given that it's on this highway, there's really not a path for foot traffic from the west side of the street over to this site. We're anticipating almost all the revenue is simply going to be revenue generated from corridor traffic on Highway 28. We'd point the neighborhood association doesn't have a problem with this use. We probably anticipate putting about an additional $200,000 into the site and improvements. It'll be well lit. It's on a well lit corridor. Sonny has experience. He owns a liquor store in Indianola. He's managed a couple of stores here in Des Moines, and now he's going to branch out on his own with this site. It's going to be branded a Royal Mart, and we'll be welcome to address any questions or concerns the board may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Yes, board members, any questions for Lloyd?
Mr. Chair, this is Cindy. I'm just curious what happened to the nail salon, because it hasn't really been there that long that I can recall. That was a nice use for that.
My sense from the current owner is that tenant just simply couldn't generate enough revenue to justify the rent for that location long term. It's a fairly large square footage building, and it may be related to that maybe their business went down, but my understanding is that they just long term weren't feeling they could generate the revenue to justify the rent at that site.
Okay.
Lloyd, two questions, and I think this may be in our packet, but what are the proposed operating hours? And secondarily, would your client be prepared to meet all requirements for landscaping or other site plan requirements as may be needed?
Yes, we anticipate our architect will help guide us through that, but we anticipate there will, have to be some changes to landscaping and stuff, and he's prepared to comply with that. We think our $200,000 budget includes that. In terms of hours of operation, he really hadn't settled on that yet, but we just emphasize again, it's a well-lit corridor. It's
right.
Really accessible for foot traffic. But we have not. He's not gotten that far in the process to figure out what store hours will be. I think he'd probably start by having it open, and as business starts to tail off into the evening, then probably close when the business starts to slow down. Sure, but there's no proposal to like be 24/7 or anything. No, it would not be open 24/7. Okay. I think maybe even by code he might be limited to 2 a.m., but I'm not sure he's looking at going that late. Gotcha. Okay. All right. Any other questions for Lloyd from the board? All right. Thank you for your presentation, sir. Thank you. Okay, now we'll move to the next portion. Is there anybody present at today's hearing that wishes to speak in support of the applicant's request? If so, you can have up to 5 minutes to speak. We just need you to hit the raise hand icon in Zoom or *9 on your phone to be recognized.
I'm not seeing any.
Okay. If there's anybody who wants to raise their hand later, we can come back around, but would there be anybody in opposition to the applicant's request that wishes to speak? Same sign. If you would like to speak in opposition to this request, hit the raise hand icon in Zoom or *9 on your phone.
Again, I'm not seeing any.
Okay. All right. And in neutrality, same sign. I won't spend much time on that. We'll go ahead and move on then. Zoning Enforcement Officer, any comments?
Chair, members of the board, I have no comments.
All right, and do we have any further questions for staff or the zoning enforcement officer from the board? All right, seeing none. Lloyd, just as a courtesy, anything you want to add in closing? Doesn't appear there's any opposition or undue questions here.
No further comments. We just thank the board for their time and service.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, then we'll close the public portion and go to board deliberation. Thoughts from the board members? Anyone? Bueller?
I know that this is Lynn Carlson. There are a lot of people concerned about having neighborhood liquor stores, and we haven't addressed the issue of hours, I believe. Or did I miss that? That was in the conditional or in the recommendation. I guess I just didn't hear what the hours would be.
Well, I think the applicant had stated they had not determined their hours yet. I don't think staff has anything in their recommendation to limit the hours. But I guess I will do this. If staff could just give us some information quickly. Does the city have a limitation on hours when liquor can be sold? Can anybody answer that from staff?
Chair, members of the board, this is Sue Ann Donovan, the zoning enforcement officer. The city does not have any limits on hours. It might be by the state liquor licensing that they have to stop at a certain time. I don't recall.
Right. All right. Thank you, Sue Ann. And I probably should have been quicker on the draw and asked that during our question period. So Lynn, yeah, it doesn't look like there's any requirements for limitations on hours. I think something to keep in mind here, the reason this is in front of us, it is a request for a conditional use permit. And we can sometimes, we take it for granted, I think, but we need to remind ourselves, if we give a conditional use permit, what that means is it's like getting a license, driver's license. Yes, we're granting you the ability to do this, but if we have any problems with it, or it presents any concerns for noise, congestion, loitering, improper illegal activities, staff can bring it back to the board and we can revoke that conditional use permit. So even if we approve this today, we do have future oversight that if it becomes a problem, then hey, it'd have to convert back to a general retail store. So I don't think staff wanted to put any undue conditions on this. It sounds like based on where it would operate, it's not as much of a neighborhood liquor store as it would be. Yes, this is a highway corridor. It's more than 63rd Street, Highway 28 from Martinsdale all the way up to Johnston. So Lynn, did you have any other concerns on that, or do you think?
I just like to hear what the other board members have to say. I think that most of the time we ask for them to close by 10 o'clock or so to prevent some of the late night running around that is a concern to people. So those are, just my concern.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Other thoughts from other members?
Mr. Chair, this is Cindy. I have to agree with Lynn. I would like to see some kind of restriction for hours. This is kind of a big jump from a nail salon to a liquor store. And there was opposition to it. And I know they're going to be plugging a lot of money into it, but this also goes with the property. So if they decide they don't want to do this, somebody else could come in and buy it and off they go. And with no restrictions around anything, it gives me a little bit pause for concern, but I'd like to hear from other board members.
This is Nathan. I think it's a reasonable concern or suggestion. I guess I'm interested in hearing, is that, Lynn, you said you thought it was 10 that we maybe had said in the past. I guess I can't remember if there were hours. Are there examples that staff could give, or is there any sort of like institutional memory about like what's customary as far as I assume the closing time is the big concern, not the.
Yeah. Well, and Nathan, a very good point. Yes, we've approved a lot of these over the years. On some of them, we've had no restrictions. things like Quick Trips and Come and Goes and other convenience stores. Sometimes the assumption is, well, they're open 24/7, so we don't limit the hours they sell the alcohol. But there have been others just functioning solely as liquor stores where we have said things like 11 p.m. or maybe midnight. I think in this case, again, this is a highway corridor, and the nearest residents to this are actually in another city. They're on the west side of the street, west side of the highway in West Des Moines. But even then, their properties back up to what I think would be, I don't know if it's First or Second Street. So we don't have any residential properties fronting this. So I probably wouldn't be as concerned of concerns with neighborhood character or impacting a residential neighborhood. I'd probably say to give folks a chance to get started and do their best with a significant remodeling investment here and site improvements. I don't think I'd want to look at a limitation any sooner than maybe midnight. But that's just me. Any other thoughts, or maybe a motion from somebody one way or the other?
This is Lynn Carlson. I make a motion that we approve staff recommendation with the addition that the store closing hours be midnight.
Okay.
To the rationale that you gave about it being kind of a highway corridor, but I don't want to leave it wide open for all hours. So
sure.
Staff with 12 p.m. closing time.
Yep. Okay. All right. So Lynn's got a motion to approve staff rec with the addition of closing hours by midnight on any given calendar day. Would there be a second on that?
I'll second that, Mel.
Okay, so we got a motion by Lynn, a second by Dave. And just before we go to vote, Judy, would that be clear enough for the record?
Do we need to have an opening time as well?
Well, yeah, I kind of wondered, close by midnight with a minimum closing of 6 hours. How would something like that be?
I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right. So with that, so Dave, would you consider amending your second for a friendly amendment that they would have to remain closed for a minimum of 6 hours after midnight?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. So if that's clear enough, we've got a motion and a second to grant the requested conditional use permit with the additional condition of they shall close by midnight on any calendar day and remain closed for 6 consecutive hours.
Chairman, is there any chance the applicant could address the board still?
Well, I guess I'm going to be super duper nice, but we had more than closed the public portion. And sometimes there's decisions we like to make, and we don't necessarily throw them back to you for what you think. But Lloyd, in this case, yes. If you can give me 60 seconds, anything you want to add before we vote?
Sure. 2 very quick comments. We would keep in mind that there are other liquor stores closer to the neighborhood areas that don't have midnight restrictions. We would not have a problem with a midnight restriction on weeknights, but weekends we would want the same competitive field as the case in other businesses along that corridor that probably have more direct impact on the neighborhoods and the accommodation.
Okay, all right. I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you. All right, so board members, before we go to vote, the only thing I might say to that is some of those other locations probably also offer other 24-hour services, including gasoline and more expansive food sales. But this isn't about comparing one site to another entirely. It's about this use in this location. So board members, so we do have a motion with a second to approve this, but with some limitations on hours. So we'll go ahead and take a vote on that. If you'd like to approve the conditional use request with the limitations suggested, you'll vote yay, opposed would be nay. So we'll have Tyler take roll call.
All right, Nathan Blake.
Yay.
Lynn Carlson,
Yay.
Dave
Aye.
Gare,
Yay.
Marlos Jones,
Aye.
Cindy Smith,
Yay.
and Mel Pins.
Yay.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, all right. Well, that concludes that item. Again, that decision and order will be issued by this time next week. For everybody's benefit for any further permits and moving ahead with the project. Okay, that'll bring us to our final item on the agenda. Item 4 is a zoning variance request in the vicinity of 601 Army Post Road.
Chair, members of the board, Jason Van Essen with the planning staff. This item is a request for a variance for the separation requirement for animal or exercise runway area outdoors for animal service use. The subject property is located on the north side of Army Post Road. It's an L-shaped parcel with frontage on 4 different streets. You can see in the map, the highlighted area. Commercial corridor to the south on Army Post with a residential neighborhood to the north. Site plan or site sketch for the development. Proposing to construct a vet clinic and then have the subject dog run to the west. That's this area. With the parking lot to the north with access to Lally Street and Southwest 6. Images of the proposed building, just to get a sense of the development. You receive a copy of the staff report with the description of the site, overview of the notification process, the criteria for granting a variance. With the separation requirement, it's not, we don't have the ability to grant an exception to those. So let's say, you know, if you're that 50% threshold or greater, we can't whittle it down to an exception level of relief. It's all or nothing from that standpoint, from it being a variance or not. It was earlier this year, you can, that was noted in the staff report too. City Council rezoned it to a limited MX3. Had a couple conditions there, but nothing unusual. And looking through this, I noted with the map, you know, this is on a commercial corridor. This type of use certainly fits in with the character of the area. They have a larger parcel. It's just the nature of the shape of the parcel doesn't allow them to have a spot on site where they could even come close to meeting that 200 separation requirement. So from staff's perspective, this isn't really a discussion or question about character or fitting the character of the area. It's about the demonstration of a hardship. In the material submitted with their application as staff, we weren't able really to find anything that we could point to as meeting that hardship criteria. Therefore, we have recommended denial. But I did want to let the commission and the board and the applicant know that, you know, this isn't a matter of character from the staff perspective. Perhaps they may have more information to share with the board today during their presentation. This is the response map. I'll go ahead and flip through the cards. And then I have a series of letters that were provided that are for the residential properties that join kind of along that north and west part of the block, offering support. This map came with that, kind of showing where those addresses correlated to. Then we have an email offering support from the Fort Des Moines Neighborhood Association. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. All right, do we have any questions for Jason here? Whoa. Okay. Hey, Jason, a question that I would have. I'm sure that this shouldn't have been news to the applicant as they developed their concept for this. Was this discussed early on with them? Is there any way the site could have been designed differently, or positioning of things differently, or are there some issues with topography to fit in that storm retention pond, etc.?
Yeah, this was pointed out to the development team in the pre-app, and then also during the development of the planning and zoning recommendation on the rezoning part. So they've been aware of the requirement. The challenge here is there's just not a 200-foot wide dimension. If you can see in this drawing before the board, even if you were to try to put a dog run at this corner, which is about the farthest you can get from any of those residential properties, you just can't get 200 feet. So
gotcha.
That's really the challenge of what they're facing, is just it's a large parcel and area, but it's shaped in a way that makes it challenging to comply with that standard.
Gotcha. Yep. And Jason, to the best of your knowledge, I don't see anything on the western edge of the parcel for any development. Would that just be open space for future development?
Yeah, their site plan just shows that as open space. It is conceivable that a site plan could come later that would separate that off. But at this time, I don't believe there's any plans for that.
Okay. All right, I've got you. So basically a dog run of any size, an outdoor dog or pet run, has to have a 200-foot separation distance from the residential, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. There's no minimum size, just any outdoor exercising would require that separation.
In a confined area, I mean, they would have the ability to individually walk dogs on a leash or pets, animals. It's just the way the code is written. You know, this is an outdoor run.
Right.
And it is what it is.
Okay. Yep. I got you. All right. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
All right. Anything else for Jason? Okay. If none, then we'll turn the microphone over to the applicant or their representative. They've got up to 10 minutes to present their reasoning for their appeal and this request for this variant. We'll just need you to start with your name and address.
My name is Corey Sharp. I'm an architect with FEH Design, which is located at 604 East Grand Avenue. Mr. Chairperson and members of the board, appreciate your time today to discuss this project. Also included in our submittal was a letter to you all, sort of trying to explain our request in greater detail, what we're trying to accomplish here. The South Des Moines Veterinary Center has been in operation in this neighborhood since 1964. And from that time to today, they have continued to grow. And their existing veterinary center includes veterinary services as well as dog boarding. They have a small exterior dog run as well as some interior space for dog boarding as well. And it has grown to be a pretty critical part of their business operations. And they've kind of outgrown their facility. So they purchased this property in July 2019 for future plans of a new facility so that they could keep the clientele that they have and keep within the space of this neighborhood that they've grown into. We've tried to do our best to meet the requirements not only of the zoning code and the aesthetic properties that are meant with the new form-based zoning code of the building, but are actually trying to go above and beyond in the design of this outdoor dog run to try and appease the conditions that we assume are meant to be protection from sight and sound, which is why we believe that 200-foot separation exists from neighborhood properties. It's a really difficult process to try and find a piece of property in this neighborhood that would allow us to do that. This one here you can see is actually extremely large, like Jason explained, but in any dimension, we're not able to fit it within this site to meet that separation requirement. So what we've done here is we're proposing an 8-foot tall wood fence as opposed to maybe a standard chain link fence or a 6-foot tall opaque fence. And we're also looking at adding additional plantings around it. So these are actually evergreen trees that are being planted around this. This will help not only visually separate the dog run, but also help with acoustics year round of that dog run. You also saw in the packet, the owner has gone to all the neighbors that live in this kind of city block here to get their support. They do support the project. We're also having some pretty good concerns about safety if the dog run would not be able to be included in this. That would limit the owner to have to walk dogs up and down the street. They have concerns that it's possible a dog could come loose from a leash, perhaps run across a street. Perhaps while they're walking a dog, there could be other interaction with people on the sidewalk that could be positive or negative. And the dog run allows all those operations to remain integral and secure within their own operations, so they can avoid any of those potential risks. Last item I might mention, one second here, I apologize. Is the, as I sort of mentioned before, this part of the business for the owner has been basically such a crucial part of their business model that it's very difficult for them to continue to operate without it. If they were to move to this site, a dog run of some sort would need to be included in this for this project to be successful. So I would encourage you, if there are any other conditions that you might suggest be included with this to allow this to be approved, we may be amenable to that. I'd be curious about what those might be. The owner is also on the call today if you may have any questions for them, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have from the board. Thank you.
Okay, any questions from the board?
Mr. Chair, this is Cindy, and hopefully this isn't too dumb of a question, but it looks like there's quite a bit of parking. Is that all required parking according to the site plan? Is that an assumption, a good assumption that that would be all required?
Yeah, if the applicant
The
would
amount
like to
of
answer that.
Oh. Yeah, the amount of parking that we're showing on this plan is above and beyond what would be required from a site plan perspective. I think one of the other questions earlier was asking about topography. That upper northeast corner of that site is the low spot. It's the existing low spot of the site. So we're actually reserving that for stormwater detention requirements that would be a part of the site plan process as well.
Okay. All right. I do have one question for you. And again, you might have already mentioned this. I was kind of studying your site plan here. The use of the dog run itself. The reason this is in the ordinance for the separation distance is so as to not disturb residential areas. So are you going to have people out there at 9, 10 o'clock midnight doing this? Or is this more of a kind of business hours thing for when you'd have staff and dogs outside?
Yeah, included in the letter that we submitted with this, we detailed that this is basically a business hours operation. This is not overnight boarding, so you wouldn't have any dogs staying overnight at nighttime being outdoors here.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Cindy. The applicant is referencing a letter. Did we get something sent to us that maybe I just missed it, or was it included in the staff presentation?
Chairman of the Board, Jason Van Essen. We don't typically put anything in your packet as far as attachments goes, and I don't believe I had it in the in my presentation file here. I can pull it up if we need to, if Corey doesn't feel like if he'd like to see it. I get the sense that I think he's hit everything that's in it. Corey, if you want to confirm that.
Yeah, I basically ran through all the points that I tried to make in the letter. Obviously, I was much more eloquent in the pre-written letter, but yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, all right. Well, if that's all the questions we got from Corey, we'll go ahead and let him step aside.
I've got another question. This is Nathan.
Oh, yeah, no, go ahead, Nathan.
Sorry. So the staff kind of talked about this, but you know, there are a couple different prongs to the variance test, and it certainly seems like a couple of them you all meet and have addressed in your proposal, and I think staff kind of concedes that you've met that. But the biggest kind of hurdle, it seems like from my perspective, is the first prong in establishing an unnecessary hardship, which is that if we were not to grant this variance, that the land in question couldn't yield any sort of reasonable return from any use permitted by the regulations of the district. You've talked about why this particular use would need to have this dog run, and frankly, I'm not sure that I'm convinced that the underlying code makes a lot of sense. I can understand why it was implemented, but 200 feet's a lot, and I think there could be exceptions if I were, you know, writing it myself. But that's not the role of this board. It's just to apply the law. And so I wondered if you could just speak to how you know, you've been deprived of, and to quote the prong here, the law, all beneficial or productive use of the land in question. It's not sufficient merely to show that the value of the land has been depreciated by the regulations, or that a variance would permit the owner to maintain a more profitable use.
Yeah, I mean, if the question is, can this lot be used for anything other than a veterinary center? I don't think I could prove that. But if the site is intended to be used for a veterinary center, I think it would be necessary for it to include a dog run if boarding is part of that veterinary center's services. That's the hardship that we're trying to prove here today, is if we're including this vet center that has boarding services, it needs to have the outdoor dog run in order for that to be successful.
Yep. Okay. All right, Nathan, any other questions for the applicant?
Nope, no, thanks for the answer.
All right, any other questions for Corey? Okay, all right. Well, what we'll do then, Corey, you can step aside for a minute, and we'll see if we've got some other comments from the public, and then we'll come back to you. Is there anybody here to speak in support of the applicant's request? Hit the raise hand icon in Zoom, or *9 on your phone to be recognized. And do we see anybody? Okay.
Not seeing any.
Okay, all right. Same sign for those in opposition or neutrality even. Hit the raise hand icon in Zoom, or *9 on your phone if you'd like to speak in opposition or have some related but neutral comments. Anyone?
Not seeing any.
Okay, all right. Then we'll go ahead and move down the line. Sue Ann, do you have any comments as zoning enforcement officer?
Chair, members of the board, I have no comments.
Okay, thank you. Any final questions we have for staff? And I'm going to go ahead and lead off with one. Jason, there was something that I recall here as I read through this again. So earlier this year, or toward the end of late last year, this appellant, I'm assuming, approached the Planning and Zoning Commission to ask for a rezoning to allow for this type of use as an animal service use, and the city council did approve that in January. Is that correct?
That is correct. And the concept, their rezoning concept that they presented is exactly what they're presenting to you today.
Yeah. Okay. And I know it was just a concept, and maybe the dog run wasn't the highlight of the day, but I'm assuming that both the commission members and city staff as well as the council were in support of the rezoning to allow for the general animal service use. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, just as a courtesy, we've done this before, although nobody spoke in opposition. If the applicant would like to have any closing comments, I'll give you a couple, 3 minutes to do that. If you don't have much to share, you don't have to, but anything else, Corey or applicant, that you'd like to share with us in closing?
Yeah, I think the only closing comment I might make would be sort of in reference to your question about sort of us going through this whole process. We were aware from the very beginning that this variance would be required and that we would have to go through planning and zoning to get rezoning, and that we would have to take it to council to get that approved and then come to this Board of Adjustment meeting. The only other sort of additional hardship we really had during that time is we couldn't really get a clear staff recommendation at any point up until this meeting on whether or not they would be in favor of this variance request. So it wasn't until this point that we were told that the staff recommendation would be to reject our variance. So we've gone through this whole process. You know, we were aware we had to do it, but had we known from the very beginning that it wouldn't have been a successful effort, we may not have approached it either.
Yep. Okay, all right. I appreciate your comments there, Corey. Okay, well, we'll close the public portion and go to board deliberation.
Mr. Chair, this is Cindy. This is a project that I really would like to be able to support. I think they've proven hardship. You know, their location that they're in now, they've been there since 1964. That's a number of years of servicing, providing a really vital service to the population on the south side. And I see the need for them to kind of stay within the same area if they, you know, and I also understand that it's not easy to find property that, you know, within the city limits that would work for this type of environment, which is probably why the rezoning concept was done and approved and moved on. You know, I see this as a real benefit to the neighborhood. There's no opposition from the neighbors. They're planning to put some extra money into the site plan to put, you know, evergreens or bushes or whatever, you know, a taller fence for the dog run. You know, I just see it as a real important need of their business. And I think they've proven enough hardship.
Yeah. Very well put. Any other thoughts? Well, what I might throw in here, folks, I know all of us are from the city and obviously to serve on this board, all of us are generally familiar with most of the locales and properties, some more than others, but I live 6 blocks from this place. For 40 years, this property was an embarrassment to this city. It was the site of a ramshackle mobile home court that directly abutted Army Post Road. With dilapidated mobile homes. Councilman Brian Meyer worked hard, including working with a long-term guy, Joe Madonia, who wanted to find a way to get this thing kind of decommissioned and cleaned up. Most of the mobile homes weren't even put on the site properly and had been encumbered on city property, for lack of a better term, illegal expansions. So the property has now sat pretty much unused for the last decade plus. There's been nothing there except for occasional graffiti, cars being abandoned on the property, and illegal dumping. To have somebody want to come in here and not just reuse this. And, you know, we've seen various uses proposed today, some that people may not like and others don't have a problem with, but to make an investment in a building of this quality, in this nature, and what this business is trying to do, this business serves the south side of the community. So it's not like you just decide to move your vet clinic to the other side of town. This project already had the nod of approval with the rezoning, review by city council. I think everybody understands what the intent is here. The neighborhood didn't have a problem with it during rezoning. They obviously don't now. But yes, we do have a variance test here. And it's always important to remember what that is. But the way the zoning ordinance is set up, that variance test, that's a hill that kind of by default might be about impossible to climb for anybody. If you've got to be 200 feet from the nearest residential, well, it's really a 400-foot thing because you've got to look at a radius on any one side. I don't know many properties that would even be zoned for an animal clinic that would have that kind of 400-foot stretch your arm out length on any one side and not abut a residential district. I do see some hardships to the land in question here where a fenced-in dog run would be needed. I just don't think walking a dog outside here is a good thing. Army Post Road is a 4-lane, hugely busy street. Any 4-lane street is going to be a little noisy, but this one certainly is. I think we have a few more Harley Davidsons on Army Post than we might have on Ingersoll. I live 2 blocks south of Army Post and I can hear the traffic from my backyard. I think it's important to have some visual separation from the dog run for the benefit of the clinic itself. And I think a variance to allow a fence would be reasonable here in light of the fact we've got a 4-lane street right there. As far as the residential impact, another part of the variance test is not having an undue impact on the character and welfare of a neighborhood. This will be well screened and only during business hours. I think that goes a long way because I tell you, I've got neighbors whose dogs do bark 24/7 and I can't do a darn thing about that. So I would move staff recommendation to approve the zoning variance. But if anybody has any other thoughts before there may or may not be a second, I'd be happy to hear them.
Mel, I'll second your motion.
This is Bert. You might want to reword that. Just say you want to move approval, not move staff recommendation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Although I was reading it, I know staff rec is to deny it. I'd like to move approval of the requested zoning variance to allow for the dog run use as presented. Dave, you got a second for me? Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. So we've got a motion and a second to grant the variance. If you want to grant the variance, when we take roll call, you'll say aye. If opposed, nay.
Cindy Smith,
Aye.
Marlis Jones,
Aye.
Dave Gare,
Aye.
Lynn Carlson,
Aye.
Nathan Blake,
No.
and Mel Pins.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-1.
Oh,
okay.
Hey, Justin Gross was here, Tyler, if you wanted to add him.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, Justin.
No, I'm going to abstain because I really didn't hear most of the arguments on either side. So
Okay.
I'm going to abstain.
So motion carries 5-0-1.
Okay. All right. Well,
Justin,
Corey,
my side was right. You
again-
should have voted with me.
I normally do. I normally do.
All right. All right. So that motion carries. Again, that decision and order will be available to you next week. I encourage you to kind of hold your horses, pun intended, until you get that, and then you can proceed with further permitting with the city.
And
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may
Yes.
jump in, I just want to reiterate that since that was a variance to a separation distance, that
Oh,
decision
yes.
will get forwarded to City Council for its review on April 5. And at that time, City Council can either accept the approval or they could possibly remand it back to the board for further consideration on April 28th. But
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Excellent. And when you do give that to the city, Bert, do you show the vote by the members and the totals and all that?
yeah, they will receive the decision in order.
All right.
Pass that out.
So they'll know that we had significant discussion on this item or any item that they review.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, so that concludes our hearing items for today. Bert, do we have any other business?
Just approval of the minutes from the February meeting.
Yes. Okay, so those that were present last month, any changes to the minutes? If there are none, would there be a motion and a second to grant approval of the minutes as presented?
I'll make a motion.
And I'll second it. So motion by Garrett, second by Pins. All those in favor that were here last month, we'll take a roll call for approval.
Nathan Blake,
Aye.
Lynn Carlson,
Aye.
Dave Gare,
Aye.
Justin Gross,
Aye.
Marlis Jones,
Aye.
Cindy Smith,
Aye.
and Mel Pins.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
Right. And
All right.
the only thing I would mention yet is that at the conclusion of the April meeting next month, we'll have a few extra items. We'll have the annual election of officers. We will adopt the any changes to the bylaws. And then Amber Lynch with Invest DSM would like to give you guys a brief presentation to just present what she's been working on with Invest DSM. That's a new nonprofit that has been doing some like economic development or land banking in the city.
Okay. All right. That sounds great. Okay. All right. Well, board members and city staff, I thank you all for your service and professionalism. And this hearing is officially concluded.
Thanks, everyone.